wild love for the world. This is not something timid or something that is too gentle. It's untamed with shades of abandon. It requires a heart that is both strong and vulnerable at the same time. Having a wild love for the world is a wholehearted way of living. Judy Fiel is one of my favorite Unitarian Universalist musicians. Her music sings our theology, and I really think that it makes it come to life. She describes what I think of as the groundwork of being in order to be able to have a wild love for the world. Judy sings in one of her songs, "Open your heart, open your mind, open your arms, open your life." That leaves no closed doors that we can hide behind. And living like that requires us to show up fully and vulnerably. At times, it's hard enough to live and love the people in my own home and in my own circles, let alone thinking about having a wild love for the whole world. I think it's about lifting my head up and raising my sights, looking beyond just the details out into the wide horizon. It doesn't have to put a burden on us. I recall a specific time that I was in an airplane and I was sitting in a window seat and I was looking down and I could see the neighborhoods. And some of them were intentional, you could tell, and some had just grown sort of randomly. There were some properties had fences. There were some cars driving, some cars were parked. I became aware of the people that were living in those houses. And no matter whether those houses had mansions and pools or whether they were clusters of apartment buildings, I knew that all the people living there had joys and sorrows. I remember becoming aware of my own worries. They didn't disappear, but my perspective on life shifted as my perspective on the world shifted. It was like I was glimpsing beyond just my own life and could see myself as part of the wider world. Somehow that made things more bearable. And in knowing myself as part of the wider world, part of the interdependent web of all existence, I can't help but extend my heart out. I think the story that Steve told in The Time for All Ages, it really highlights that part of being part of that interdependent web of all existence. The reading that Audrey shared is from an interview from the program On Being, a program that's on NPR. The interview was between Krista Tippett and Joanna Macy, who is an eco-philosopher. In it, Joanna Macy also acknowledges that nurturing a wild love for the world requires something of us. She says, "You're always asked to sort of stretch a little bit more, but actually that's what we're made for. There's a song that wants to sing itself through us. We've just got to be available. Maybe the song that is to be sung through us is the most beautiful requiem for an irreplaceable planet. Or maybe it's a song of joyous rebirth as we create a new culture that doesn't destroy its world." She asks us to consider the possibility of letting ourselves be available for the song that wants to sing itself through us. Of course, I'll eagerly raise my hand and tell you that this is how I strive to live, but it's not easy. It's a spiritual practice. In the middle of the night when I can't fall back to sleep because I am ruminating on relationships that need healing, I forget to pray Judy Fiel's song about opening my heart. When the vulnerable spot on the back of my neck that tends to clench and tighten like a vice, nudging me to realize when something is out of right relationship in my life, I forget to sing that song in my heart. It's easy to have an open heart in the face of joy. But the transformation happens when we let go of things that are tangled around our hearts, binding our arms to our sides in stubbornness. Like so much of the spiritual journey, opening our lives creates the most good when it's the hardest to do. On my best days, I want to forge my path along these lines, to see myself as someone who can love not only my small corner of the world, but the whole world. Someone who can love not only deeply but wildly, with love bubbling out and bringing healing to the world. I fall short all the time, living only sparse moments like this. And yet, I still want to be that type of person. Rainer Maria Rilke has captured this way of being in just a few lines in one of his poems. He writes, "Just give me a little more time. I need just a little more time, because I am going to love the things as no one has thought to love them, until they're real and worthy of you." What an image of a wild love for the world that is. I am going to love the things as no one has even thought to love them, beyond even imagination. Love them until they become real and worthy of you, of the universe. In striving to live a wild love for the world, we're also challenged to let go of any remnants of belief that we ourselves are unlovable. How can we have a wild love for the world unless we include ourselves in that also as part of the world? To really stand on the side of love, we have to believe that we too are worthy of love and belonging. Then, when we feel like we do belong as an integral part of the family of things, that there is a place for us, it's from that place that we can send love out. You are worthy of love. And I try to remind myself that I am too. Having a wild love for even a small piece of the world requires as much openness as we can risk, probably even more so. Risk, yes. It is a grand risk to open our hearts to love like this. As Joanna Macy told us in our reading, the other face of our love for the world is our pain for the world. She says that if you are afraid of grief and pave it over, clamp down, you shut down. Learning how to dance with despair, to see how we are called to not run from the discomfort and not run from the grief or the feelings of outrage or even fear. And if we can be fearless to be with our pain, that it turns. That's a huge risk. Feeling our way into grief on faith that it will change into a deeper love. It means not watching my own life go by as if it's a movie of someone else's life. It means not recounting the events of my story just from my memory or from my intellect, but actually uncovering my own feelings, becoming conscious of the way that my stomach clenches and the way the space covering my heart aches. Letting this happen, not defending against it or rationalizing it away. And when we do this, our grief turns to reveal its other face, our love for the world, our absolutely inseparable connectedness with all there is. Another Rilke poem expresses these two faces beautifully. The English is, "God speaks to each of us as he makes us, and then walks with us silently out of the night. These are the words that we dimly hear. You, sent out beyond your recall, go to the limits of your longing. Embody me. Flare up like a flame and make big shadows that I can move in. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror, Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand. When we stretch ourselves and when we go to the limits of our longing, allow ourselves to open to what it is that we desire the most, we embody the sacred. This, according to Rilke, is what brings God to life. That's a different view than I learned in Sunday school. When we live our lives in ways that allow for mystery, for beauty, for relationship to manifest, we're providing the means for spirit to live and to breathe on earth. Lass dir alles geschehen, Schönheit und Schrecken, as Rilke wrote in German. Man muss nur gehen, kein Gefühl ist das Fernste. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going, no feeling is final. The promise here is that we will not get stuck in the pain. The encouragement is to let the things that we fear happen to us and to keep going until that fear turns into a deeper compassion, into a heart that grows. Just keep going and don't let yourself lose a sense of what matters most. We need companionship along such a treacherous journey. We need one another, this covenantal community, to walk with us silently out of the dark nights, with hands joined together and hearts beat as one, emboldened by our faith. There's an old rabbinic parable about how all will be called before God. And God will ask, "Where are your wounds?" "We have no wounds," we will reply. And God will say to us, "Was there then nothing worth fighting for? And was there nothing to love?" So I ask you, where are your wounds? Are they in the same place as the things that you fought for? Are they in the same place as your love? Do you hurt the most where you love the most? I remember on September 11th, 14 years ago, I was working just outside of Washington, D.C., and I couldn't get home because they had closed the beltway around the city after the plane was crashed into the Pentagon. My daughter was 1.5 years old and in daycare back in Annapolis where we lived, which on that day seemed 1,000,000 miles away from me. I knew rationally that she was safe, but there was such immense trauma and fear and chaos in the air everywhere. I remember on that day hearing myself say that my heart beat outside of my body. I had never thought those words before, but on that day I knew that it was deeply true. I was near D.C., but my heart was beating in Annapolis, in the body of a 20-month-old little girl with curly pigtails, who had left the house that day with her shoes on the wrong feet, because even at that age she was independent. It was such an experience of how very vulnerable love made me. She is worth fighting for, worth giving everything for, worth all of my love. And she is where the world could wound me the deepest. The other face of our love for the world is our pain for the world. One of Wendell Berry's poems speaks to our service. He writes, "When despair grows in me, and I wake in the middle of the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. As a child, I often had spells of anxiety. It was very painful. I had no language for it. Now, I would describe it as something like liquid terror. It was that bad. My grandparents had a rustic house, a cabin, on Lake Wallenpaupack in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. It was my favorite place on earth. I could there find peace like Wendell Berry talked about. I could find peace lying on a big sun-baked rock when I was all wet from swimming in the cold water, or sitting on the dock as it rocked up and down with the waves. I can remember looking out over the water and seeing the wind ripple its way to me. I was actually able to see something that normally I could only sense. To me, God lived there. And I feel a sense of peace just imagining it, the calm, the natural order of things. Everything is right with the world. When despair grows in me and I feel the face of my pain for the world, if I can, for a time, rest in the grace of the world, I am free. Living a wild love for the world requires everything of us. It requires us to have our hearts and minds and arms and lives open, not only to joy, but to heartbreaking sorrow as well. And the same world that shows us its pain is also the same world that gives us its gifts of grace. We cannot do the work of the wild love for this world without such comfort and peace along the way. Activist, author, and professor Cornel West has said, "Justice is what love looks like in public." In cultivating a wild love for the world, we're called to live that love publicly as justice-making. In opening our hearts, minds, arms, and lives, we are transformed. We are transformed in our own beings, but that is not yet enough. Because then we have the prophetic imperative to act, and to do so together as a whole community, as a whole religious tradition. This is not work to be done in isolation, but in covenant with one another. Individually, may we do what we can to have our hearts be in a holy place. And together, may we live a wild love for this world, speaking out and standing up, working to make this a more beautiful and beneficial place for all. Amen. And now I invite us to stand